The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The black flag of ISIS is now flying over government buildings, and the logo is on police cars in a Libyan city on the coast of the Mediterranean. Fighters loyal to the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria are now in total control of a city in Libya called Derna, the population of which is 100,000, not far from the Egyptian border and just about 200 miles from the southern shores of the European Union. Sources say that the Derna branch of ISIS counts 800 fighters and operates half a dozen camps on the outskirts of the town, as well as larger facilities in the nearby Green Mountains. Lewis, surprised that we have ISIS now in an additional country?
No, not at all. A country that is really not that stable. Are we going to see this pop up in other countries? I know they plan to move into Egypt. I really doubt that's going to happen. Well,
now that they are very close to the Egyptian border, that is a concern, which is, will there be an attempt to move into Egypt in earnest? The Libyan branch of ISIS, as I mentioned, now has a really tight grip on the city of Derna. They control the courts, they control education, they control local radio, and many people emailing me and saying, David, why here? Why Derna? In other words, why are they not elsewhere in Libya? And a few reasons. Number one, Derna has a long history of Islamic radicalism. Number two, Derna was marginalized during the Gaddafi era. It contributed more foreign fighters per capita to al-Qaeda in Iraq than any other town in the Middle East. It also has provided many fighters to ISIS in Syria. It seems like it is a known entity, Lewis, as a place that has a high level of radicalization and a much higher success rate in terms of bringing people over to fight your particular brand of holy war.
Yeah, and it's not surprising that this is happening in Libya. It seems like the recruiting tactics are working, and they are somehow getting people excited about joining ISIS all over the place.
If this spread, I mean, as I mentioned, we're already only a couple of hundred miles from the southern shores of the European Union. If this starts bleeding over into the Mediterranean Sea in a more significant way, do you think, Lewis, we're going to see European countries become more proactive in getting involved in the battle against ISIS?
The closer this gets to their soil, the more active they'll be. And if it reaches their soil, I predict that ISIS will quickly be just squashed like a bug.
Well, but so let's figure out what you mean by that. If we have elements of ISIS, and again, a lot of these are subgroups of ISIS kind of under that umbrella, if we do see them encroach upon European soil in earnest, do you think that this is going to lead to hyper-aggressive bombings of ISIS in Iraq necessarily, which is not actually close, or will it just be a direct response only to the elements that are actually encroaching on Europe?
I think you'll probably see more bombing. I think if this does reach European Union soil, you'd probably see more of an effort by perhaps the UN and other countries to try and stop this or at least slow it down. I don't think that it would just strictly be left to whatever country they invade.
And the other question, of course, at what point is this going to further engage the American military further? As we've talked about, almost 3,000 troops on the record now in the region. How many off the record, we're not totally sure. Send me your thoughts. What do you see happening here in the next 6 months with regard to ISIS? Keystone XL pipeline. I told you that the newly elected Republican majority in the Senate is definitely going to try to push for approval of the Keystone XL pipeline. And a lot of people confused by news over the last 12 to 24 hours that the Keystone XL pipeline has died in the Senate. This is true, but bear in mind that this is before the Republican majority takes over in the Senate. So it is dead for now. And the news around this is that Senator Mary Landrieu failed to get the 60 votes that she needed to send a bill approving the Keystone XL pipeline to President Obama's desk. She was scrambling up until the last minute, but unfortunately, 41 ended up voting against this bill. Landrieu's career is probably over as far as a politician anyway, but as we know, the Keystone XL pipeline fight is going to continue. Remember, this is a pre-Republican majority defeat of the Keystone XL pipeline. And we are going to really, as progressives, we really are going to need to focus on this once the new Republicans are inaugurated for the following Senate. Creation of 50 permanent jobs, a cost that has ballooned from an estimated $5.4 billion to $8 billion, further locking in this kind of dirty fossil fuel polluting status quo with regard to energy and pushing us further away from true alternative energy development, bad for the environment, more profits for the profiteers in energy, the banksters, etc. Of course, most Republicans and even some Democrats are in favor of this. This is going to be an absolutely huge battle, Lewis.
When this bill lands on Obama's desk, and I'm using I'm saying when because it will happen. Don't quote me on that, but will he veto it?
You're saying something that you don't want to be quoted on. Yes, President Obama will veto this. I can only assume that there are no scenarios under which, for all of his plutocratic credentials and evidence over the last 6 years that we've seen from the president, that on many things he just kind of goes along with the plutocratic mean of the current state of our elected officials on the political spectrum. I think he would veto it, but it's not going to be, I assume, the first thing that the Republicans will do in the Senate, because they're probably going to again try to repeal the Affordable Care Act and also impeach President Obama. We're going to talk more about that. So Keystone XL pipeline will be high on the list of priorities for the new Republicans in the Senate, but I don't think it'll be number one.
Well, we know that it will be on the highest priority for their donors. So maybe it will be number one.
Yes, a lot of money going into Republican pockets that would really like to see the Keystone XL pipeline approved, and into Democratic pockets as well. Let's not ignore that. As I've talked to you many times before, we see these crazy knee-jerk reactions from the unthinking right whenever there is cold weather, for example, or a snowstorm, or it's cold in winter in North Dakota, for example, as once Fox News reported on, to say that this is evidence that there is no climate change because we see climate change, we being they, see climate change as global warming, and it's cold and it snowed, so clearly all climate change is a lie. And that is exactly what is happening as climate deniers are feverishly pleasuring themselves, Lewis, to news reports of 6 feet, 70 inches of snow in Buffalo, New York. On Tuesday in New York, yesterday, in Buffalo, New York, you could be basking in the sun in one place and shivering in a blizzard of lake effect snow in another place. And this is because of this lake effect that's happening off of Lake Erie. You can see the video online. It is truly incredible to see this. And the climate change deniers, I knew instantly once we had news of this that they would just be going at themselves in a fit of pleasure, Lewis, and they absolutely were. Here's some comments from Twitter, just a sampling for you. Damn this global warming. Look at the New York State Thruway in Buffalo this morning with a picture of snow. Here's another one. Global warming doesn't exist. Just ask someone from Buffalo, New York. Quote, this global warming has to stop. If it keeps up, we're all going to freeze to death. And so what did winters in Buffalo look like before global warming? Lastly, hey, Al Gore, come shovel the 6 feet of global warming off of our driveway. This is really important, okay? So we need to break this down. There are two layers to this analysis. First of all, individual weather events do not prove or disprove any broader trends in climate. Weather events are not climate. That is number one, okay? Number two, if you want to focus on temperature, okay, we're actually on track for one of the warmest years in recorded history in 2014 on a worldwide basis. And these deniers, Lewis, seem to say, well, we had a cold winter in the Northeast US, so clearly there's no global warming, but even that would be factually false.
You would think that after the hurricanes, the blizzards, the bizarre events like this one, that people might think, things are kind of crazy. Maybe there is something going on here that is that we should be worried about. But no, I guess if it snows and it's cold, there's no such thing as global warming.
And the last part of the analysis, which of course is in spite of the fact that worldwide temperature is actually much higher than it has been in recorded history, let's ignore temperature alone for a second, because global warming is not the right term we should be using. Climate change is the right term. And the climate change models and the research from actual real scientists tells us that even though, broadly speaking, the planet is getting warmer, more erratic weather and individual periods, remember, a year or two is not a huge period of observable history. Individual extreme weather events of both hot and cold are to be expected under serious climate models. So even if it were true that we had a really cold year, that still wouldn't disprove global warming in the sense of its impact on climate change.
And you know who is to blame for this? It's the corporate media. It's Fox News, and it's all the media outlets who play the false equivalency game and who or just dismiss this flat out.
Libertarian champion Rand Paul, who has been ranting and raving for, I would say at this point, years, about needing to rein in the power of the government, including NSA spying, has actually helped to kill an NSA reform bill. So you might be saying, wait a second, David, Rand Paul wants more restrictions on the NSA. Why wouldn't he vote for such a bill? I will tell you exactly why. The USA Freedom Act, which was sponsored by Senator Patrick Leahy, a Democrat, received 58 votes last night, too short of cloture, which is that magic number in the Senate that would move the bill to an actual roll call vote. The 40 Republicans and 1 Democrat who voted against the bill did so mostly because they said the bill didn't go, that the bill went too far in restricting the NSA's powers. Rand Paul, however, didn't vote for cloture because he said the bill does not go far enough. And Rand Paul admits that he is partially responsible for the failure of this bill and that it, quote, probably needed his vote. He says that this doesn't go far enough. Do you question, Lewis, the political validity of this strategy?
I question everything Rand Paul does. Do you think this is politically motivated?
Well, so I was thinking, Ted Kennedy, the great late senator from Massachusetts, often talked about how he views politics as an incremental game. If you have an opportunity to vote for a bill that gets you closer to where you want to be rather than farther away, that's a bill you should support, because then when you go to your next round of negotiations, you want your next bill, you are that much closer to where you want to be, and your actual desired position is not as far from where you are. Rand Paul seems to not believe that, and there are some people who believe in unless we're tearing this all down and replacing it with exactly what I want, I'm not going to support it. Some people consider this a kind of principled and very moral position. On the other hand, many consider it kind of boneheaded from a political perspective.
Well, politically, I don't think Rand Paul will be anywhere other than where he is right now. I don't see him in higher office. Or maybe you're just talking about, certain bills individually when it comes to your voting record and this and that.
Well, I'm saying if he really is a libertarian, this bill did provide a more libertarian point of view or perspective on what the NSA would be allowed to do. But I'm increasingly convinced, Lewis, that Rand Paul is really not a libertarian, because when you think about it, you can't really oppose reproductive choice and be a libertarian. That is a way in which Rand Paul is actually an authoritarian, not a libertarian. You can't oppose same-sex marriage, for example, and call yourself a libertarian. And Rand Paul has said that he personally opposes same-sex marriage, but that he would favor allowing states to decide for themselves. If you are actually libertarian, then your view would be, what I personally think about gay marriage doesn't matter. It should be legal for those who want to participate in it. Saying, I personally oppose this is not a libertarian view.
Yeah, so maybe he is just playing a political game. And I think as the more we talk about libertarians, the more ambiguous the term libertarian seems to become.
Oh, of course. It's libertarian increasingly has a very specific meaning only when related to very particular political issues. And when it comes to so much other stuff, libertarian actually is very, very much authoritarian today. And Rand Paul is the perfect representation of that. We have a fantastic program planned for you today. I have amazing Hatriot Mail for you, and we will speak to a water economist about all of the water problems that we are facing on this planet today.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show membership program is made possible in part by liberalbias.com because good conservatives know that climate change is a myth, but there are so many charts and graphs that seem to disagree. You need to know about the liberal bias inherent in temperature, weather, and other sciencey things at liberalbias.com. Today's new member of the day is Arnstein Kellevold. Arnstein Kellevold from Europe. Congrats to Arnstein on being today's member of the day. You can join Arnstein at davidpakman.com/membership or get your Hatriot Mail calendar for free with your membership at davidpakman.com/calendar15. And remember, as the holiday gift buying season gets going, anything you buy on amazon.com can support our show if you first go to our website, davidpakman.com, and click on the Amazon banner on the right side of the page. It is Wednesday, and thus it is time for Hatriot Mail.
Hatriot Mail, your break from the tyranny of unbiased, independent media. Because knowledge and information are just communist conspiracies. Hatriot Mail, written by patriots who hate David Pakman. Because America. And because freedom.
As you know, if you've been listening to this program for any amount of time, that there are some people who are really fixated on the hypothesis that Michelle Obama is actually a man. And this edition of Hatriot Mail is the Michelle Obama is a transsexual edition. The fact that somebody spends so much time thinking about this is truly shocking to me. But this is America, where people have the freedom to think about whatever they want, Lewis. Let's take a listen.
David, you are wrong. All website articles I have viewed show that Michael Obama is indeed a tranny. Just look at his hands and the size length of his fingers compared to a woman's hands. Look at his shoulders and arms and observe they do not resemble a female's. Look at several front-on pictures of him and see there is a bulge in his groin shown in his dresses. Look very carefully at his neck below his chin when he speaks, and you may detect an Adam's apple.
Ugh.
Accept it. Obama is not just anti-American. He's married to a man.
Isn't it incredible, Lewis, that people research this stuff to such a degree? And you've got people like Alex Jones who are doing these analyses of, oh, look at the shoulders and all this stuff, and people buy into it.
They do. The children must be adopted. Is that part of the conspiracy too?
Of course it is, Lewis. I mean, listen, if you can run a 46-year conspiracy, or however old President Obama was when he was first elected, 44 years, to get a Muslim Indonesian Kenyan terrorist dog eater into the White House, then just getting him a couple of kids is really no big deal.
I guess that would be the easiest part of this whole charade.
Speaking of insane attacks on President Obama, ever since the idea of President Obama having to use executive action on immigration has been mentioned, even before President Obama has talked about it, right-wingers, Republicans, Libertarians, conservatives, religious nuts, everybody on the right has been talking about how this would be an impeachable offense. It would be a huge overreach of presidential authority if President Obama were to unilaterally act, because Republicans just obstruct, by the way, if President Obama were to unilaterally act on immigration, and it would be worth impeaching him over it. However, it turns out that many Republican presidents have taken almost identical executive action over immigration as to what President Obama might be doing. Republican President Ronald Reagan. I know Republicans don't talk about this guy much, Lewis, but there was this Republican president called Ronald Reagan. Some Republicans think he wasn't a bad guy. Ronald Reagan took executive action on immigration, and did it to put a stop to the Republican Party's inhumane treatment of Hispanic immigrants. The legislation was called the Immigration Reform and Control Act. It granted up to 3 million undocumented immigrants a path to citizenship if they had lived in America continuously since 1982 or 4 years at the time of 1986. It is almost identical to President Obama's proposal for comprehensive immigration reform, which Ted Cruz will not even let Republicans debate because it is so insane. Well, Ted Cruz's hero Ronald Reagan did the exact same thing. What about George H.W. Bush? George H.W. Bush took nearly identical executive action on immigration in 1989, again, without the input of Congress. And then George W. Bush in 2008 signed in the now notorious law that allows children from Central American nations to stay in the United States. This is the law that resulted in what is happening now, which of course President Obama is being criticized for. And then if you go back even further, every single president going back to and including Dwight D. Eisenhower has taken executive action on immigration without facing any threat of lawsuit, without facing threats of government shutdown, without facing threats of impeachment. What's the big difference, Lewis, with President Obama? Why should President Obama be impeached for doing the same thing that every president dating back to Dwight D. Eisenhower did?
Because Republican presidents can't do anything wrong. And everything Obama does is wrong.
Well, but even Democratic presidents going back to Dwight D. Eisenhower did this, and they weren't threatened for impeachment either. I mean, I know that President Obama...
I would argue that if you put them, if it was one of those presidents today that did this, that they would be threatened with impeachment by Republicans.
Maybe so. I mean, we know that the obvious difference is President Obama is half black. That's a very specific and visible difference. I don't want to just say that's why he would be threatened with impeachment if he did the same thing that they all did. But it's hard for me to really find other differences.
There don't seem to be any. And this is just part of the We Hate Obama campaign. It's continuing despite his, no, there's no chance that he will be president again. But the focus is still on making him look bad.
This year's Global Terrorism Index says that religious extremism is the main cause of terrorism in the world. The report recorded 18,000 deaths in 2013, up 60% from the previous year. The majority, 2/3 of those terrorism-related deaths, were attributable to 4 groups: ISIS in Iraq and Syria, Boko Haram in Nigeria, the Taliban in Afghanistan, and Al-Qaeda. Overall, there has been a 5-fold increase in death from terrorism since the 9/11 attacks worldwide. The report's authors attribute the majority of these incidents over the past few years to groups with a religious agenda. More than 80% of the deaths due to terrorism in 2013 were in 5 countries: Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Nigeria, and Syria. In the United States, looking at North America, almost all terrorism deaths were related to political extremism rather than religious. I want to make a very specific criticism of this study. And we've talked about this before in the context, actually, of the Sam Harris, Bill Maher, Ben Affleck debate. Just because a given group cites religious beliefs, I don't know that it's fair to say that religion is the primary driver of terrorism, because lots of other rationales and explanations and excuses become relevant. If you look at economic power, inequality, sociocultural standing, if you have that lacking in an area that is more religious, you will have more terrorism, and it will be under the veil of religious extremism. If you have that same socioeconomic strife in an area where the culture is more connected to politics than religion, you will still have more terrorism, but it will be under the guise of political extremism. So I am the first person to say, as we have always said on this program, that religious extremism does lead to violence in the real world. We have said that time and time again. But when we look at the study, we need to parse the numbers by realizing that just because a group is religiously affiliated doesn't necessarily mean that we can say religion in a vacuum alone was the driver of these terrorist acts.
No, when you look at a group like the Taliban, it's very clear that they are very politically motivated. They use religion as an excuse, and they use it to recruit and all of that. But clearly, there is a lot of political motivation there.
An interesting study, a valuable study, but we need to always explore what do we really say when something is religiously motivated in terms of the specific actions of individuals, of the group. What are we really talking about? Stay with us. Follow me on Twitter, twitter.com/dpacman.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I'm joined today by David Zetland, who is a water economist, the author of Living with Water Scarcity, and professor at Leiden University College in the Netherlands. David, it's so great to have you here. We've been talking about issues related to water for many years. This includes water shortages and droughts, the bottled water industry, lack of clean drinking water in much of the world. And I think a good place to start would be just to ask you, when you think of all of the issues around water today, what's the most pressing to you?
Governance. I think the way that we divide and manage water is increasingly critical in the world because there's more people wanting less water.
Explain that. There's more people wanting less water. Someone might say, well, don't we have the same amount of water on the planet total at all times? Is that not correct?
That is correct from a physical perspective. It is incorrect from a, if you want, either economic or useful perspective. Obviously, you can go to the ocean right now and there's plenty of water. You can't drink it. You can't use it to make silicon chips. You can't use it for the toilet. So the water that we want to use is a lot smaller proportion than the water that we see outside. And the challenge is getting it from one form into another form, whether it's a physical form or a locational form.
Okay, and I want to get to desalinization a little bit later, but let's first start with some basic numbers. What percentage of all of the water on the planet is without any treatment whatsoever, what we would consider drinkable water?
Far less than 1%.
Less than 1%?
Yeah, far less. And I mean, even rainwater has got contamination in it, unlike the scenario, for example, in Dr. Strangelove. Rainwater can it can remove particulate matter from the air and therefore be contaminated. Most groundwater is, in many parts of the world, is in good condition in terms of quality, but there's an increasing amount of groundwater which is contaminated in many countries. And then you have surface water, which is almost by definition going to be contaminated, sometimes to the point of being dangerous. And then you have basically snow and ice. So that 1% actually does represent quite often snow and ice, but that's hard to get to.
And when we talk about the increasing water shortages here in the U.S., it's been particularly noticeable on the West Coast, but of course all over the world. We had a very long list that we talked about a few months ago. What's the primary cause for this shortage that is now being seen?
You know, the basic economics are supply and demand. So the supply of water for most communities is a combination of surface storage, underground storage, aquifers, and surface moving water, like rivers. And if there's a drought, then there's less water being delivered to surface sources like rivers or surface storage like reservoirs. And so that means there's not as much supply, and demand could be increasing because the drought also means higher temperatures, or demand can be stable. And in which case, if you're using water, you might be running out of your surface water, and that's why a lot of parts of the United States as well as the world are seeing increasing groundwater stress.
And is this a cyclical process in the sense that right now we're experiencing this, but it's reasonable to expect that at some point in the future it will be made up for by more water supply than the amount demanded? Or is there something about human activity on Earth today that is pushing this in a way that goes beyond just the natural cycle?
There's two answers to that. The first one is to do with climate change, which is what people tend to call the end of stationarity, or the move to non-stationarity. And what that means is that the temperatures and the precipitation cycles are moving out of an area that we're familiar with. And that can mean good news in some ways because you'll have a lot more rain. It could mean bad news because you have a much longer drought. It can mean terrible news, meaning you'll have difficult, terrible storms and floods. So climate change is showing up in various ways. The other problem that we're having in terms of cycles is that traditionally we have been able to tap into groundwater supplies when there was not a lot of, there was a drought, for example. And that has continued to happen over decades. And that you can call that your bank account. And every time you run short of your weekly paycheck, you go to the bank and you get a little bit extra out of the groundwater account, let's say. And if you do that enough, there's not much left in the groundwater account. So what was a normal drought, or so the drought today might be equivalent to the drought 30 years ago, but we don't have as much groundwater around to buffer ourselves through that drought period. So that's causing more problems right now.
And when we talk about a water shortage, even that term has a drastically different meaning for someone in California as compared to someone in other parts of the world. And I'd love for you to talk about that a little bit. For someone in California, a water shortage might mean no washing of cars outdoors and try to limit the length of your showers. But in other parts of the world, people literally do not have access to clean drinking water. What percentage of the world is in that latter state of affairs?
Well, the official UN statistics that are based on the Millennium Development Goal, which is to reduce the number of people without access to clean drinking water, that goal was redefined from clean drinking water to access to an improved water source, which means a pipe. And the pipe might not have drinkable water in it or water at all. So by that bureaucratic definition, there's 1 billion people who lack access to an improved water source. Other estimates have put the number of people who lack access to clean drinking water closer to 3 billion people.
So presumably there's some 2 million people there who may have 2 billion, sorry, who may have a pipe, but that pipe is not actually providing water. So from a bureaucratic standpoint, they have access, but practically speaking, there's no actual clean drinking water available.
Right. So the water, they might get water 1 hour per day, or the water they get, they have to boil to make it clean. Sometimes they don't do that, so waterborne disease spreads and so on. So it's in some ways you're talking about parts of the world where people don't just go to the tap and turn it on and drink the water that comes out of it, which is something that most Americans take for granted.
When we talk about food supply, particularly in the United States, but even worldwide, many analyses have come to the conclusion that we are by no means in a situation where people are going hungry because of a lack of food. It's a distribution and allocation issue, a political will issue. When it comes to water, we're in maybe a slightly different scenario because there are actually shortages of water happening. So how would you characterize that? Could we get clean drinking water to everybody with no supply issues?
Yeah, you could. I mean, you have to remember that the water we drink is a very small proportion of the water we use. So the water we drink, people drink, let's say, at a maximum about 4 or 5 liters of water per day, or about just over a gallon of water per day for drinking purposes. In the United States, you'll have many communities where people are going to be using, say, 50 to 100 liters of water per day indoors. That translates into about 20 or 30 gallons of water. And then they're going to use double or triple that outdoors. And when you say there's a shortage of water, that doesn't mean you can't drink the water or you can't take a shower or prepare food. It means that you don't have enough water to water your lawn or wash down your driveway. From another perspective, if there's a shortage of water, it means that businesses might have to cut back on some activities. It means farmers will have to keep some land fallow and grow crops in other land. So shortages show up by reducing the activities that we can use water for, and that can have different impacts in different sectors of the economy.
Let's go back for a second to something you alluded to at the beginning of the interview, which is that most of the water which is freely available, we could go and grab a bucket, is salt water in the oceans. Right. What are the practical impediments to desalinization and other modification of salt water, as the term may be, for human use?
There's 2 main ones. One is money. It's very expensive to build an entire factory, essentially, for converting salt water into drinking water. or into lesser salt water, because sometimes desalinated water is used for irrigation that would taste terrible to us. So money is a factor, and the other factor is the environmental impact of using a tremendous amount of energy to convert or to remove the salt from water. The oldest way of desalinating water is to evaporate it, and you have to boil water to evaporate it, and that takes a lot of energy. The newer methods use either physical or chemical tricks to reduce the cost of desalinating the water, but it's still extremely high relative to taking more or less clean water from the natural hydrological cycle.
So bearing that in mind and keeping in mind the shortages that we've talked about both over the last few months and years and with you today, when you look at the next 5, 10, and 20 years, what do you see as the best path forward? If it were up to you to provide recommendations to those who had the power and resources to make changes, where would money be best spent?
I think the first thing I would do is stop spending money in some places. So in fact, instead of spending money, I would remove subsidies towards water consumption in some places. In cities, there tend to be subsidies towards suburbs where they're building new networks, and the cost of the new network is not paid by the new occupants of the houses. In agriculture, you tend to have subsidies in terms of farmers paying 50% or 20% of the cost of the water that they're using. And if you would remove those subsidies, of course it would have a financial impact, but it would also make it those users of water a lot more careful about how much they use, because they would be paying a higher price. Once you got past that, there's extra steps which, as far as I'm concerned, should involve more pricing of water as a commodity. But it's important to remember that some water should not be treated as a commodity. It's the water that we have in our shared environment, for example.
We've been speaking with David Zetland. He is a water economist, author of Living with Water Scarcity, and professor at Leiden University College in the Netherlands. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
A Utah woman says she encountered only brief resistance when she recently had her driver's license photo taken while wearing a colander on her head as a religious statement. Asia Lemon, whose legal name on her license is Jessica Steinhauser, said that the pasta strainer she wore on her head represents her beliefs in the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster, a known satirical church. The Flying Spaghetti Monster is also known as Pastafarianism, started in 2005 as a protest against intelligent design. And Asia Lemon, who is apparently also the former porn star Asia Carrera, whose actual name appears to be Jessica Steinhauser, became the fourth member of the church and the first in Utah to be allowed to wear headgear, the specific Pastafarianism headgear, in a license photo. Nanette Rolfe, who's the director of Utah's driver's license division, said about a dozen Pastafarians have had their driver's license photos taken with a similar colander or pasta strainer on their heads in recent years. As long as we can get a visual of the face, we're fine if they choose to wear the headgear. In general, hats and headgear are not allowed in driver's license photos unless they're connected to religious beliefs, Lewis. This is really getting absurd, but it's absolutely correct, because if you are going to allow, I don't know, a yarmulke to be worn, or one of those surfboard-like hats that you see within the Catholic Church, although I don't really know for sure that those would be worn just casually day to day. If you are going to allow those, though, certainly you would have to. You have to allow a pasta strainer as well.
You do, and this is the right move. And I would encourage people, especially in Utah, to join the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster. Let's get the ball rolling on this.
You have to assume, Lewis, that if 15 or even 10% of all people going to get driver's license in the country started wearing pasta strainers, that very quickly we would see at least some kind of challenge to what the rules are, and then you would get into that debate of, well, which religions are legitimate ones or not, which is really where you get into trouble. I'm working on a new religion, Lewis. It's a soup-based religion. Instead of saying amen, it's ramen, you know, the Asian noodle soup. I haven't yet figured out what the item would be that I wear on my head. Maybe one of the big ramen soup bowls or something like that.
And then we'd have two noodle-based religions, which is fine with me. Who doesn't love noodles?
We've talked a little bit about the diet fads, including Atkins, including paleo, including no carbs, including all carbs, high protein, low protein, etc., etc. What seems to happen over the years is that these fad diets come and go, and we go back to what really seems to be the most logical and healthy diet. And that, time and time again, Lewis, seems to be the Mediterranean diet, which we will outline a little more specifically. The Alzheimer's Association of Canada has now said that 50% of Alzheimer's diagnoses are attributed to factors associated with poor lifestyle choices. And as we know, diet is one of the most important lifestyle choices that somebody can make. And Dr. Carol Greenwood, who's a nutrition and cognitive scientist, said that after spending 20 years in diet and dementia research, she has learned a lot about the impact of nutrition on cognitive and brain function, and that some of the results that they got to a recent study surprised even her and the research team. She said, we're getting increasingly solid evidence that individuals who eat a Mediterranean-style diet are more protected when it comes to cognitive decline. What is the Mediterranean diet? A lot of people don't know what this is. If we imagine that outdated food pyramid, if we redo the food pyramid, taking into consideration the Mediterranean diet, at the base, you would have fruits, vegetables, whole grains, olive oil, beans, nuts, legumes, seeds, and you should base most of your meals around this. The next step of the food pyramid for the Mediterranean diet would be fish and seafood at least 2 times a week. Following that would be poultry, eggs, cheese, and yogurt daily to weekly, but in smaller quantities. And then at the very top, meats and sweets less often. This is not as expensive of a diet as some people may think. Now, I understand that fish and seafood, depending on where in the world you live, are actually quite expensive. But when you look at beans, nuts, legumes, seeds, olive oil, good olive oil can be more expensive. But if you think about the amount of calories that you're getting from that olive oil, it actually is not that expensive when thinking in those terms. Not buying as much red meat can actually save you quite a bit of money. This is a diet, Lewis, that time and time again seems to be something we go back to, which is not really a diet. It is really more of just a lifestyle.
It is. And the fads, they come and go. People are always looking for some miracle diet that will just solve all their problems. But, I mean, we have evidence here that is thousands of years old. And has been working for quite a long time. And
the fascinating thing about this, Lewis, is lots of the studies in modern nutrition try to isolate protein or isolate trans fats. And the problem with those studies is when you remove something from a diet, invariably something is added because people are generally replacing those calories with something else. So it's hard to get a broad picture of the impact of a particular change. What the Mediterranean diet studies show us is that this broad lifestyle decision as far as diet seems to have a positive impact.
Yeah, and I like to say that there really are no secrets when it comes to diet. There's only laziness and ignorance.
You're telling me goji berries won't solve everyone's problems?
They won't solve mine. Good luck.
We talked yesterday on our voicemail segment about some of the repetitive and long and religious-based voicemails that we get. And in response, we got the following voicemail to our voicemail line, 219-2-DAVID-P. The man claims that this is the perfect voicemail. Let's take a listen.
No religion, excellent reception, astonishing brevity. I am the greatest voicemailer.
So there it is. He did not address religious texts. He had good reception on his cell phone when he called, and he was also brief. So, Lewis, in a sense, that was the perfect voicemail, but it doesn't really give us that much to talk about, unfortunately. It also needs to be substantive.
I would say it's close to the perfect voicemail, but we haven't reached it yet. I would encourage this man to try again.
Today on the bonus show, Lewis will talk to us about a global cocoa shortage. Is he considering relocating around this shortage? Wow. Pedophilia and murder in the United Kingdom, And virginity tests for female police recruits in Indonesia. What is all that about? Lewis will tell us on the bonus show. He is the host, I am the sidekick, and you can get instant access to the bonus show by going to davidpakman.com/membership or going to davidpakman.com/calendar15, where you can get yourselves a free Hatriot Mail calendar with a yearly membership.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.